whether it is Qatar or the US, or we can't say we have succeeded. Everyone is trying. And again, it comes back to us, really. If you look at what we've been doing on our continent, much progress has been made. I think we can't say nothing has been done, generally. Whether it was to do with the reforms, and I think Africans have come together. They have defined things and speak with one voice increasingly. There is significant progress. But most of these developments that have been happening in the last decade, as I said, are reminders that there are things we need to do that we haven't done. So if you look at it at the African Union level, I remember when I was the champion of the reform process, there are things that were discussed on the continent. For example, the peace and security facility that was put in place. Because it was put in place to avoid being fully dependent on external funders, because that has been the case. In fact, this is similar to what happens in other areas in different countries. We find we depend so much on the external partners and forget ourselves to put in place what we really have to do and can do. So that is progress. And then, so in terms of peace and security, and again, you look at the whole continent, you find there are many trouble spots in different areas. All kinds of efforts going on, back and forth, succeeding in some places, not succeeding in others, and continued efforts going on. Again, these are some of the areas, because of the past and how we have handled our own affairs, that we are all of a sudden reminded that we can't do all things by ourselves and revert to these partners. In other words, in any case, it doesn't, even if we're able to do things ourselves, we still have to bring in partners who have what to offer. But we have, as Africa, to be able to define which direction you want to take and not entirely depend on what these people are contributing.
All right. President Ramaphosa, you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, on the peace process, particularly in the conflict that's been happening on our continent and particularly in the Eastern DRC, I'd like to compliment rather than contradict what President Kagame is saying. The processes that have been happening on the continent, either the Nairobi process or the Rwanda process or the AU process, have been very, very essential in building a foundation of peacemaking and also confidence building, up to and including agreements that have been reached for a ceasefire between the belligerents, up to and including the withdrawal of, say, the SADC forces as they are withdrawing now. I mean, people may think that President Kagame and I are in conflict, and some of you may have thought that there's going to be fireworks as we're sitting close to each other.
It is wonderful to see you agreeing and not contradicting each other. You're all thinking it.
So all these efforts have been building a very strong and firm foundation. And of course, because our countries on the continent are not islands, we don't live alone in this God-given world or planet. We have to interface and interact with others. So whatever contribution others can make who are extra-African is important. But in the end, we must also remember the principle that we have adopted as Africa, that African problems or African solutions for African problems. In the end, and President Kagame knows this, whatever discussions are happening, in the end has to be endorsed, signed off, and owned and appropriated by us as Africans, because this is our continent. We are in charge of the future of this continent, and we must build peace ourselves because we live on this continent, and therefore we have a deep responsibility to ensure that peace does indeed prevail. And what they are doing with Qatar, US, or whoever is part of the peace-building process, but it is inherently African. And we must thank and applaud those who are assisting because they are our partners, but we are the owners of the whole process ourselves as Africans.